The alarm buzzed at 5:30 a.m., just like it had every morning for the past 3 years. Maya Chen rolled over in her tiny studio apartment, her body aching from another 14-hour shift at Antonio's Italian kitchen. The smell of garlic and tomato sauce had somehow followed her home, clinging to her hair and clothes no matter how many times she washed them. She stumbled to the bathroom and looked at herself in the cracked mirror. Dark circles under her brown eyes told the story of endless double shifts and sleepless nights spent worrying about bills. At 28, she felt much older. Her hands, once soft and nimble, now bore small cuts and calluses from years of carrying heavy plates and scrubbing dishes when the kitchen got backed up. Maya grabbed her uniform from the chair beside her bed. The black polo shirt had seen better days, and she'd sewn the small tear near the shoulder 3 times already. She couldn't afford to replace it, not when every dollar went toward keeping the lights on and putting food on the table. Walking to work through the busy Chicago streets, Maya passed the music store on 5th Street. She always took this route, though it made her commute 10 minutes longer. In the window sat a beautiful black piano, its keys gleaming under the soft showroom lights. She stopped, as she did every morning, and pressed her palm against the cool glass. For just a moment, she could almost hear the music again. The way Chopin's nocturnes used to flow from her fingertips, the thunderous applause that once filled concert halls when she performed. The proud smile on her teacher's face when she graduated from music school with top honors. But that was another life. Another person, almost. A horn honked behind her, snapping her back to reality. She hurried the last 2 blocks to Antonio's, where the morning prep crew was already unloading boxes of fresh vegetables. The restaurant wouldn't open for lunch until 11, but there was always work to be done. "You're 3 minutes late," called Tony, the manager, not looking up from his clipboard. He was a decent man, but running a restaurant had made him obsessed with every small detail. "Sorry, Tony. Traffic was heavy on State Street." Maya tied her apron and headed to the dining room to set up tables. Antonio's tried to be fancy, with white tablecloths and cloth napkins, but the building was old, and the carpet had stains that wouldn't come out no matter how much they scrubbed. In the corner of the main dining room sat an old upright piano. It had been there when Tony took over the restaurant 5 years ago, and nobody knew quite what to do with it. The previous owner had apparently hired musicians to play during dinner service, but that was expensive and Tony couldn't afford such luxuries. Now the piano just collected dust. Someone had put a plant on top of it, and customers sometimes used it as a place to set their purses or coats. The keys were probably out of tune and one of the pedals squeaked when pressed. But Maya knew these things because she'd checked, late one night after closing when everyone else had gone home. She'd only touched the keys for a moment. Just a simple scale, barely audible. Even out of tune, the sound had made her heart race and her eyes water. She hadn't touched a piano since her father got sick. The lunch rush started at 11:30 sharp. Maya moved between tables with practiced efficiency, balancing plates on her arms and memorizing orders without writing them down. Her customers never knew that the woman bringing their pasta had once performed for audiences of thousands. Table 7 ordered the chicken parmesan. Table 12 wanted extra cheese on their pizza. The family at table 3 couldn't decide between the lasagna and the spaghetti, so Maya patiently explained each dish, recommending the lasagna because it was Tony's mother's recipe and truly special. "Excuse me, miss." An elderly woman at table 5 waved her over. "Could we get some more bread? And maybe turn down that music? It's quite loud." Maya glanced at the speakers in the corner. The volume seemed normal, but she nodded with a smile. "Of course, ma'am. I'll take care of that right away." She brought fresh bread and adjusted the music, then checked on table 9, where a businessman was getting impatient about his order. The kitchen was backed up because 2 servers had called in sick, leaving Maya to cover twice as many tables as usual. By 2 o'clock, her feet were killing her. The lunch crowd had finally thinned out, and Maya took a moment to rest against the counter near the kitchen. She closed her eyes and rubbed her temples, trying to ease the headache that always came with stressful shifts. "You okay, Maya?" asked Carlos, one of the cooks. He was probably the only person at the restaurant who genuinely cared about her well-being. "Just tired. Nothing new." Carlos studied her face. "You know you should take a vacation." "When's the last time you took time off?" Maya almost laughed. "A vacation? With what money?" She couldn't even afford to call in sick when she had the flu last month. "Maybe next year," she said, the lie coming easily. The afternoon was quieter. Maya used the lull to roll silverware in napkins and refill salt shakers. Mindless work that let her thoughts wander. Sometimes she imagined what would have happened if her father hadn't needed surgery, if the medical bills hadn't eaten through their savings, if she hadn't had to drop out of graduate school to work full-time. She might have been performing in Europe by now, or teaching at a prestigious music academy, or recording albums that brought joy to people around the world. But dwelling on what-ifs never paid the bills. Around 4, Maya's phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Doctor appointment tomorrow at 10 a.m. Can you drive me?" Maya's stomach tightened. Her father had been gone for 2 years, but her mother's health was declining too. High blood pressure, diabetes, and now mysterious pains in her joints that the doctors couldn't quite figure out. Each appointment meant time away from work, and Tony wasn't always understanding about schedule changes. She texted back quickly. "Of course. I'll pick you up at 9:30. That meant she'd have to work a split shift tomorrow, coming in early to prep and staying late to cover the dinner rush. Her day off had just disappeared, but family came first. It always did. The dinner crowd would arrive soon, and Maya knew it would be another long night. Her back ached, her feet throbbed, and she still had 6 hours left on her shift. But she straightened her shoulders, checked her reflection in the mirror behind the bar, and prepared to smile at the next table full of customers. As she walked past the old piano, she let her fingers brush against its dusty surface. Just for a second, just enough to remember who she used to be, before life demanded she become someone else entirely. Friday nights at Antonio's were always chaos, but tonight felt different from the moment Maya walked in for her evening shift. The hostess stand was already crowded with people waiting for tables, and she could hear Tony in the kitchen barking orders at the cooks who were struggling to keep up with the dinner rush. Maya tied her apron and jumped straight into the madness. Table 6 needed their drinks refilled. Table 12 was still waiting for their appetizers. The family at Table 4 had been seated 20 minutes ago and hadn't even gotten menus yet because Jessica, the other server, had called in sick again. "Maya, you're covering sections 1 through 4 tonight," Tony announced, rushing past with a tray of bread baskets. "And Table 9 is asking about their reservation. They've been waiting 30 minutes. Maya nodded and hurried to the hostess stand. Table 9 turned out to be an anniversary couple who'd booked weeks in advance, and they were understandably frustrated. She apologized sincerely and promised to get them seated within 5 minutes, then somehow managed to clear and reset a table in record time. As she walked them to their seats, she noticed a man sitting alone at Table 15 in the corner. He was probably in his early 40s, wearing a simple gray sweater and jeans, nothing fancy. What struck her wasn't his clothes, but his posture. He sat very straight, very still, watching everything happening around him with unusual focus. Most customers on busy nights complained about slow service or long waits. This man just observed, his hands folded calmly on the table, a slight smile on his face as if he found the controlled chaos amusing rather than annoying. Maya grabbed a menu and water glass and headed over to him. "I'm so sorry for the wait," she said, setting down the water and menu. "We're a bit behind tonight, but I'll take great care of you." He looked up at her with kind eyes. "No rush at all. I'm David, by the way. I don't think I've been here before." "I'm Maya. Welcome to Antonio's. Can I start you with something to drink?" "Just water is fine for now. Take your time with the food order." "I'm in no hurry," Maya smiled gratefully. Patience customers were rare on nights like this. "Thank you. I'll check back in a few minutes." She rushed back to her other tables, taking orders and delivering food, but found herself glancing over at David occasionally. He seemed content to sit quietly, occasionally checking his phone, but mostly just watching the restaurant operate. There was something calming about his presence in the middle of all the chaos. 20 minutes later, Maya returned to take his order. "Have you decided on dinner?" "The lasagna sounds perfect." "And Maya?" He looked at her carefully. "You're doing an incredible job tonight. I can see how hard you're working." The comment caught her off guard. Most customers barely looked at servers as people, let alone notice their effort. "Thank you. That's very kind." As she turned to leave, disaster struck at Table 7. Mr. Richardson was a regular customer, but not the pleasant kind. He came in twice a week, always complained about something, and never left a decent tip. Tonight he was with his business associates, which usually made him even more difficult because he liked to show off. "Excuse me." His voice cut through the restaurant's chatter. This is completely unacceptable. Maya hurried over, already knowing this wouldn't end well. What can I help you with, Mr. Richardson? He held up his plate of chicken marsala, his face red with anger. This sauce is cold. Stone cold. And there's a hair in my salad. He pointed dramatically at what might have been a piece of lettuce but could have been anything in the dim lighting. I'm so sorry about that. Let me get you a fresh plate right away and I'll have the kitchen remake your salad. Fresh plate? Richardson's voice got louder, drawing stares from other tables. Do you have any idea who I am? I've been coming here for 3 years and the service just gets worse every time. First we wait 20 minutes for our drinks. Then the food comes out wrong. This is embarrassing. Maya felt her cheeks flush. The drinks had been 5 minutes late at most and she'd checked his order twice with the kitchen. But arguing would only make things worse. You're absolutely right to be frustrated, she said calmly. Let me fix this immediately. I'll talk to the manager about taking care of your table tonight. You should be more careful, Richardson continued, his associates looking uncomfortable now. Maybe if servers like you paid attention to what you were doing instead of chatting with customers, these mistakes wouldn't happen. Maya bit her tongue. She'd been moving nonstop for 4 hours and hadn't chatted with anyone except to take orders and check on tables. But she maintained her professional smile. Of course, sir. I'll get your food fixed right away. From his corner table, David watched the entire exchange. He saw how Maya handled the situation with grace even though the customer was clearly being unreasonable. He noticed how she didn't argue back or make excuses, just focused on solving the problem. Most importantly, he saw the brief moment when she turned away and took a deep breath to compose herself before heading to the kitchen. 10 minutes later, Maya returned to Richardson's table with a fresh plate and new salad. Here you go, sir. The manager has also taken care of your check tonight. Richardson barely acknowledged her, diving into his food without even a thank you. When Maya finally made it back to David's table with his lasagna, she looked tired but maintained her professional demeanor. This looks amazing, David said as she set down the plate. Everything okay with that other table? Maya glanced over at Richardson, who was now laughing loudly with his guests as if nothing had happened. Just part of the job. Some nights are more challenging than others. You handled that really well. Not everyone would have stayed so calm, she shrugged. Getting upset doesn't help anyone. Besides, most customers are wonderful. It's just the difficult ones you remember. David nodded thoughtfully. As Maya walked away, he found himself more intrigued by her character than he'd expected to be when he decided to grab dinner at a random restaurant. There was something about the way she carried herself, the quiet dignity with which she did her job, that reminded him of people he'd known who had overcome real hardships. He ate slowly in no rush to leave. The lasagna was actually quite good, and he enjoyed watching Maya work. She moved with efficiency and grace, somehow managing to keep 6 tables happy despite being clearly overwhelmed. She remembered details without writing them down, anticipated what customers needed before they asked, and somehow found time to help bus tables when the restaurant got really backed up. As the evening wound down and the crowd began to thin, David lingered over his coffee. He'd noticed something else during his meal, the old piano sitting in the corner. It was clearly out of place in the restaurant, covered with a thin layer of dust and topped with a plastic plant that had seen better days. When Maya came by to refill his coffee, he gestured toward the instrument. That's an interesting addition to a restaurant. Does anyone ever play it? Maya followed his gaze and shook her head. Not since I've been working here. It was here when Tony bought the place. I think the old owner used to have live music, but... She shrugged. It's just decoration now. Shame, David said quietly. Pianos are meant to be played, not just looked at. Something flickered across Maya's face so quickly he almost missed it. Pain, maybe, or longing. But before he could be sure, her professional smile was back in place. Can I get you anything else tonight? Just the check, please. And Maya? Thank you for excellent service. This has been a lovely evening. As she walked away to get his bill, David made a decision that would change both their lives forever. By 9:30, Antonio's had finally quieted down. The last of the dinner customers were finishing their desserts, and Maya was clearing tables and wiping down chairs, her body running on autopilot after another exhausting shift. Her feet ached and she still had an hour of closing duties ahead of her, but at least the chaos was over. David sat at his corner table, nursing his 3rd cup of coffee and watching Maya work. She moved methodically through her tasks, stacking dishes and folding napkins with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this thousands of times. But he noticed something else too. The way she glanced at the old piano every time she passed it just for a split second, like she couldn't help herself. Tony emerged from the kitchen, untying his apron. "Maya, you can handle the last few tables, right? I need to run to the bank before it closes. It wasn't really a question." Tony always left early on Fridays, leaving Maya to close up with Carlos in the dishwasher. "Of course," Maya replied, though she looked tired enough to fall over. She began collecting the salt and pepper shakers from the empty tables, moving in her usual quiet way. David made his decision. He stood up and walked over to where Maya was working. "Excuse me, Maya." She looked up, surprised. Most customers left as soon as they finished eating. "Is there something wrong with your check, Mr. David?" "No, the check is fine. Actually, I wanted to ask you something unusual." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "That piano over there, would you be willing to play something on it?" Maya froze, a salt shaker halfway to her tray. "I'm sorry, what?" "The piano. Would you play something? Anything you'd like." She shook her head quickly. "Oh no, I couldn't. I'm just a waitress. I don't play piano. Besides, I'm sure it's horribly out of tune and I need to finish cleaning up before we close." David studied her face. The way she'd said, "I don't play piano," felt rehearsed, like something she'd convinced herself was true. "I have a proposition for you. Play one song, any song you know, and I'll pay you $10,000. The salt shaker slipped from Maya's hand and clattered onto the table. "I'm sorry, did you say $10,000? "That's right. 10,000 cash." Maya stared at him, wondering if this was some kind of joke. $10,000 was more than she made in 3 months of double shifts. It was enough to catch up on her mother's medical bills. Enough to fix her car that had been making that scary grinding noise. Enough to breathe for the first time in years, but it was also impossible. "Sir, I appreciate the offer, but I really don't play piano. You'd be wasting your money." David pulled out his wallet and counted out a thick stack of bills, setting them on the table between them. Maya's eyes widened. She'd never seen that much cash in one place. "The money is real," David said quietly. "And the offer stands. One song. That's all." Maya looked at the money, then at the piano, then back at David. "Why would you do this? You don't even know me." Sometimes you meet someone and you just know there's more to their story than what you can see on the surface. You've got good instincts, Maya. Strong character. And I have a feeling about that piano. A feeling about the piano. The way you look at it when you walk by. Like you're seeing an old friend you can't quite bring yourself to talk to." Maya's heart started racing. How had he noticed that? She thought she'd been so careful, so subtle. "I really should get back to work. Maya." David's voice was gentle but persistent. "What do you have to lose? If you truly can't play, then you're right, I'll have wasted my money. But what if you can? What if there's a part of you that remembers how?" She stood frozen, staring at the dusty piano bench. 3 years. It had been 3 years since she'd touched piano keys. 3 years since she'd let herself even think about music as anything more than the background noise in restaurants and elevators. "I can't," she whispered. Can't? Or won't? The question hit harder than she expected. Maya felt tears threatening behind her eyes. "You don't understand. I'm not that person anymore. That life is over." "What life?" Maya realized she'd said too much. She grabbed her cleaning cloth and started wiping the table again, even though it was already clean. "Nothing. I need to finish my work." David reached out and gently touched her wrist, stopping her frantic cleaning. $10,000, Maya, no strings attached. No judgment if you can only manage Mary Had a Little Lamb. Just sit at that bench and put your hands on those keys. Maya looked at the money again. $10,000. Her mother's diabetes medication cost $200 a month and insurance barely covered half. Her rent was 3 months behind, and her landlord was starting to make threats about eviction. This money could solve so many problems, but it would also force her to face the dreams she'd buried. "What if I can't remember anything?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Then you've still earned the easiest $10,000 in history." Maya walked slowly over to the piano, her legs feeling like lead. The bench was covered with a thin layer of dust, and when she wiped it off with her apron, her hands were shaking. She could feel David watching her from across the room, but also Carlos from the kitchen door, and even the last customer at table 12 had stopped eating to see what was happening. She sat down on the bench and lifted the keyboard cover. The keys were yellowed with age and definitely needed tuning, but they were all there. 88 keys, just like every piano she'd ever played. Maya placed her hands in her lap and stared at the keys. Her reflection looked back at her from the black keys, distorted and fragmented. She remembered sitting at her first piano lesson when she was 7 years old, her feet barely reaching the pedals. She remembered her teacher, Mrs. Chen, who used to say that music was like breathing, something you couldn't live without once you really understood it. She remembered the conservatory, where she'd spent 4 years learning that music wasn't just notes on a page, but a language that could express everything the heart couldn't say in words. She remembered her graduation recital, playing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 with the school orchestra, her parents in the front row with tears streaming down their faces. And she remembered the day she'd closed the piano lid in her childhood home for the last time, knowing she was walking away from everything she'd ever wanted to be. "Take all the time you need," David said softly from his table. Maya lifted her right hand and placed it gently on middle C. The key felt cold under her finger, but familiar, like coming home after a long journey to find everything exactly where you left it. She pressed the key and the note rang out clear and true in the quiet restaurant. Not perfect. The piano definitely needed tuning, but real, musical, alive. Her left hand joined her right, and suddenly she was no longer Maya the waitress with aching feet and empty pockets. For the first time in 3 years, she was Maya the pianist again, and her fingers remembered exactly what to do. Maya's fingers rested on the keys for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. The restaurant had grown completely quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of dishes clinking in the kitchen. Even Carlos had stopped what he was doing and stood in the doorway, watching with curiosity. She started with something simple, a basic scale, just to see if her fingers remembered how to move. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. The notes were slightly out of tune, but they rang clear in the silent restaurant. Her muscle memory kicked in automatically, and she found herself playing the scale with both hands, in harmony. David leaned forward in his chair, already sensing this was going to be more than either of them had expected. Maya closed her eyes and let her hands find their way to a piece she'd learned as a teenager. Pachelbel's Canon in D. Simple, beautiful, and burned into her memory from years of practice. Her fingers moved slowly at first, testing each note, but gradually gaining confidence as the familiar melody flowed from the old piano. The customer at table 12 had stopped eating entirely and was staring openly. Carlos wiped his hands on his apron and stepped fully into the dining room, drawn by the unexpected sound of music filling their workplace. As Maya played, something magical began to happen. The years of exhaustion and worry started to melt away from her shoulders. Her posture straightened. Her breathing deepened. For the first time in 3 years, she wasn't Maya the tired waitress counting tips and worrying about bills. She was Maya the musician, and the piano was welcoming her home. The canon ended and she kept her hands on the keys, feeling the vibrations fade into silence. She could hear her own heartbeat loud and fast. "That was beautiful," David said quietly from his table. "But I have a feeling you're just getting started." Maya looked at him over her shoulder. "I haven't played in so long. I'm probably making mistakes. I don't think anyone here cares about mistakes." She turned back to the piano and let her fingers drift to another piece, Chopin's Minute Waltz. Her old teacher had assigned it during her sophomore year of college, and she'd practiced it hundreds of times until it became as natural as breathing. Even now, rusty and nervous, her hands remembered every note. The waltz began gently, the melody dancing between her right and left hands like a conversation between old friends. But as she played, muscle memory took over completely, and the piece began to come alive in ways she'd forgotten were possible. Carlos moved closer, his eyes wide with amazement. He'd worked with Maya for 2 years and thought he knew everything about her. She was quiet, hardworking, always professional. But this was like discovering that the person you saw every day was actually a completely different person in disguise. The customer at table 12 pulled out his phone and started recording, though Maya was too lost in the music to notice. As the minute waltz reached its flowing middle section, Maya felt tears starting to fall. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed this. The feeling of creating something beautiful from nothing but her fingers and an instrument. The way music could express emotions that words never could. The pure joy of being completely absorbed in something you loved. But it was more than just missing music. She was grieving for the life she'd given up. The dreams she'd buried. The person she used to be. Without conscious thought, she transitioned into another piece. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, one of the most hauntingly beautiful pieces ever written, and one that had been her father's favorite. She'd played it for him in the hospital during his final weeks, when words failed and only music could bridge the gap between them. Now, as her fingers found the familiar opening notes, she played it not just as a performance but as a memorial, for her father, who'd sacrificed so much to pay for her music education, for her mother, who still asked sometimes when Maya would play piano again, and for herself, for the dreams she'd had to let go. The nocturne poured out of the old piano with surprising richness. Despite being out of tune, the instrument responded to Maya's touch like it had been waiting years for someone who truly understood how to play it. Each note rang with emotion, building and falling in waves that seemed to fill not just the restaurant but the hearts of everyone listening. David sat transfixed. In his line of work, he'd heard many professional musicians perform in concert halls and recording studios. But there was something different about this moment. Maya wasn't playing for an audience or for money or for recognition. She was playing from a place of pure need, like someone who'd been holding their breath underwater and finally reached the surface. Tony chose that moment to return from the bank. He walked through the front door expecting to find Maya quietly finishing her closing duties, but instead found his restaurant transformed into something resembling a concert hall. He stood frozen by the hostess stand, his keys still in his hand, trying to process what he was seeing. Maya was completely lost in the music now. The nocturne built to its emotional peak, her right hand singing the melody while her left provided a rich foundation of harmonies. Her face was streaked with tears, but her expression was peaceful for the first time anyone in that room had ever seen. As the piece wound toward its gentle conclusion, Maya's playing became even more intimate, as if she was sharing secrets that could only be told through music. The final notes hung in the air like a prayer, soft and pure and heartbreakingly beautiful. When silence fell again, nobody moved. Maya kept her hands on the keys, her chest rising and falling as if she'd just run a marathon. Carlo stood with his mouth slightly open. The customer at table 12 had tears in his eyes. Tony looked like he'd just discovered that one of his employees was secretly a famous artist. David stood up slowly and walked over to the piano. "Maya," he said gently, "how long have you been able to play like that?" She looked up at him, her eyes still bright with tears. "I studied at Northwestern. Got my bachelor's degree in piano performance. I was working on my master's when—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. When what? When life got in the way. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "My father got sick, cancer. The treatment was expensive and someone had to work to support the family. So I left school and took the first job I could find." David knelt down beside the piano bench so he was at her eye level. "Maya, what you just played? That was extraordinary. That was the kind of playing that should be heard by thousands of people, not just the handful of us lucky enough to be here tonight." She shook her head. "That was 3 years ago. I'm out of practice, out of shape, and I'm not 22 anymore with dreams of being a concert pianist. I'm a waitress who needs to pay rent." "You're a pianist who happens to work as a waitress," David corrected gently. "There's a big difference." Maya looked around the restaurant for the first time since she'd started playing. Everyone was staring at her. Carlos, Tony, even the dishwasher had come out from the kitchen. But they weren't looking at her with pity or confusion. They were looking at her with awe. "I should get back to work," she said quietly, starting to close the piano lid. David placed his hand gently on the lid, stopping her. "Maya, before you do that, there's something I need to tell you about who I am." Maya looked at David with confusion, her hand still resting on the piano keys. "What do you mean, who you are? You're David, the customer who just paid me $10,000 to play piano." David smiled gently and reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a business card. "My full name is David Chen, and I think it's time you knew why I really came to Antonio's tonight." Maya took the card with trembling fingers. The name meant nothing to her at first, but as she read the small print below, her eyes widened. Chen Technologies? You're the David Chen who started Chen Technologies? Guilty as charged. Maya stared at the card, then back at David. Chen Technologies was one of the biggest software companies in the country. She'd seen David's face on magazine covers in the grocery store checkout line. He was worth billions, and here he was sitting in a rundown Italian restaurant offering her money to play piano. "But why?" she whispered. "Why are you here? Why did you ask me to play?" David pulled his chair closer to the piano. 3 years ago, I started a foundation called the Chen Foundation for Arts Education. We help talented people who've had to give up their artistic dreams because of financial hardship. We provide scholarships, mentorship, and opportunities for people to return to their passions. Tony stepped forward, still holding his keys and looking completely bewildered. "Excuse me, but are you saying that Maya is some kind of famous pianist? Because she's been working here for 3 years and never mentioned anything about music." "She's not famous yet," David said, his eyes never leaving Maya's face. "But she should be. What I just heard was extraordinary. Professional level, concert hall level." Maya shook her head, overwhelmed. "Mr. Chen, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but you don't understand. I can't just go back to music. I have responsibilities. My mother needs medical care, I have bills to pay, and I haven't practiced seriously in 3 years. I'm not the same person I was in college." "You're right," David said. "You're better. The person who just played that nocturne has lived through real hardship. She understands sacrifice and responsibility. She has depth that most 22-year-old music students don't have yet." Carlos wiped his hands on his apron and joined the conversation. "Maya, I've known you for 2 years, and I've never seen you look the way you looked when you were playing, like you were finally being yourself for the first time." Maya felt tears threatening again. "Even if that's true, I can't afford to chase dreams anymore. Dreams don't pay for my mother's insulin or keep the lights on." David leaned forward. "What if they could? What if I told you that the Chen Foundation wants to offer you a full scholarship to finish your master's degree? Not just tuition, but living expenses for you and support for your mother's medical needs." Maya's breath caught in her throat. "That's impossible. You don't even know me." "I know enough. I know you've worked 3 years of double shifts to support your family. I know you handled a difficult customer tonight with more grace than most people could manage. And I know you just played 3 pieces that moved everyone in this room to tears." David paused. "But there's more. The foundation is launching a new program next month. We're looking for a spokesperson, someone who represents the artists we help, someone with real talent and a real story." "A spokesperson? You'd travel to schools and community centers, sharing your story and performing for students who might be facing the same choices you faced, showing them that it's possible to come back to your dreams even when life forces you to put them aside." David smiled. "The position comes with a salary of $200,000 a year, plus performance fees." Maya nearly fell off the piano bench. $200,000 was more money than she'd ever imagined having. It was enough to take care of her mother, pay off their debts, and actually live instead of just surviving. "But I'm not ready," she said, panic creeping into her voice. "I need months of practice, maybe years. I can't just walk onto a stage and perform after being away from music for so long." "Which is why we'd start with the scholarship," David explained. "You'd have a full year to get back in shape, work with the best teachers, and prepare." "And Maya?" He gestured toward the piano. "After what I just heard, I don't think it's going to take you very long to remember who you are as a musician." Tony cleared his throat. "Not that I understand anything that's happening here, but Maya, if this is real, you have to take it. I've watched you work yourself to death for 3 years. If someone's offering you a chance to do something you love and get paid for it, you'd be crazy not to try." The customer at table 12 approached the piano, still holding his phone. "Excuse me, I hope you don't mind, but I recorded part of that last song. My daughter is studying piano at DePaul University and I wanted to show her. That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard in person." Maya looked at the small crowd that had gathered around the piano. Carlos with his encouraging smile, Tony with his practical advice, the customer with tears still in his eyes from her performance, and David, whose eyes held a mixture of hope and certainty that made her believe, for the first time in years, that maybe dreams could be more than just dreams. "What would I have to do?" she asked quietly. "Right now? Just say yes. Say you're willing to try. The foundation will handle the scholarship applications, find you the right teachers, and give you all the time you need to prepare. There's no pressure, no timeline except the one you're comfortable with." Maya looked down at her hand still resting on the piano keys. 3 hours ago, she'd been Maya the waitress, worried about making rent and covering her mother's medical bills. Now someone was offering her a chance to become Maya the pianist again. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Of course you are," David said. "Anyone would be. You're talking about changing your entire life. But Maya, what scares you more? Taking a chance on your dreams, or spending the next 10 years wondering what would have happened if you had?" Maya closed her eyes and played one more note, middle C, letting it ring in the quiet restaurant. When she opened her eyes, she looked directly at David. "Okay," she said. "Yes, I'll try." 6 months later, Maya stood on the stage of the Chicago Symphony Center, wearing an elegant black dress and looking out at an audience of 1,200 people. Her mother sat in the front row, tears streaming down her face, healthy and proud. In the wings, David watched with satisfaction as Maya's fingers found the opening notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. As the orchestra joined her and the music filled the concert hall, Maya smiled. She was no longer the waitress who'd given up her dreams. She was Maya Chen Rodriguez, scholarship recipient, foundation spokesperson, and most importantly, herself. Finally, completely herself. The girl who'd once served pasta and worried about bills was gone. In her place stood a woman who proved that it's never too late to come home to the person you were meant to be.